Life has a funny way of setting the stage for its most dramatic performances. For me, it all began in 2017, in a quiet neighborhood in Dallas, Texas. I was 26, living what I thought was a dream life. My name is Ethan, and back then, I worked as a software engineer for a promising tech startup. Long hours, sure, but the job was rewarding. More importantly, I was in love, or at least I thought I was. Enter Hannah. The woman I believed was my soulmate. Hannah was everything you'd want in a partner. Smart, funny, and stunningly beautiful. We had met at a mutual friend's party 2 years prior. I'll admit, the moment I saw her, I was completely hooked. There was something magnetic about her presence. She had this knack for making you feel like you were the only person in the room. And maybe in those early days we moved in together within 6 months of dating. My friends thought it was too fast, but what did they know? Hannah and I had this connection that felt unshakable. She was a freelance photographer with a sharp eye and an even sharper sense of humor. She'd often tease me about my nerdy programmer lifestyle while showing off her latest artsy shots of the city. I loved that about her, how she balanced my logical, structured world with her creative chaos. But if life teaches you one thing, it's that appearances can be deceiving. Our relationship seemed perfect to everyone else, but looking back, I can see the cracks that were always there. For starters, Hannah's personality came with a certain restlessness. She wasn't the kind to sit still for long, always chasing the next adventure, the next project, the next thrill. At the time, I admired her spontaneity. I thought it balanced my own more cautious nature. Things started to change when she landed a big photography gig, a series for a trendy new magazine. This was the opportunity she'd been dreaming of, and I was genuinely thrilled for her. The only downside? It required her to spend a lot of time working late nights and traveling. "Don't wait up for me," she'd say, kissing me on the cheek as she headed out the door with her camera bag slung over her shoulder. And I didn't. I trusted her. In hindsight, I trusted her too much. Started small. Subtle shifts that are easy to dismiss when you don't want to see the truth. She began spending more nights out than in, her phone always buzzing with texts she'd quickly swipe away. "It's just work," she'd explain with a breezy smile when I asked, "You know how demanding these clients can be." I nodded, convincing myself it was normal. After all, her career was taking off. How could I not support that? Then came the little white lies. "Who were you with last night?" I'd ask casually. "Just some coworkers," she'd reply, not quite meeting my eyes. It's funny how you can sense when something's off, even before you have proof. But at the time, I chalked it up to my own insecurities. After all, she'd never given me a reason not to trust her. Right? I'd always been the kind of guy who avoided confrontation. Growing up as the middle child in a noisy household, I learned early on that keeping the peace was easier than picking fights. So when Hannah's behavior started to bother me, I did what I'd always done. I buried my feelings. Instead, I threw myself into work. My startup was entering a crucial growth phase, and my role as a lead developer meant late nights of my own. I told myself that our busy schedules were just a temporary hurdle, something we'd overcome together once things settled down. But they didn't settle down. One night, about 3 months into her new gig, Hannah came home late, really late. It was almost midnight, and I'd been half asleep on the couch, waiting for her. When she walked through the door, she looked different. Flushed cheeks, tousled hair, and an energy I couldn't quite place. "Long shoot?" I asked, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "Yeah, it ran over," she said quickly, avoiding my gaze. Something about her answer didn't sit right, but I let it go. I didn't want to be the overbearing boyfriend questioning her every move. Still, the nagging feeling stayed with me. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more inconsistencies. There were the sudden phone calls she'd step out to take, the way she'd seem distracted during our conversations, and the nights when she'd come home smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. I told myself I was overthinking things, that I was imagining problems where there weren't any. But the doubt kept creeping in, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. Then came the turning point, the moment when doubt turned into certainty. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Hannah had gone out, supposedly for a client meeting. I was tidying up the apartment when I found her laptop open on the dining table. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but the screen caught my eye. A notification had popped up from her email, a name I didn't recognize. I hesitated, telling myself it wasn't my place to look. But curiosity got the better of me. I clicked. What I saw stopped me cold. The email thread was casual but intimate, filled with inside jokes and playful banter. The kind of exchange that didn't happen between coworkers. The sender's name? Caleb. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I scrolled through the messages. It wasn't explicit, but the undertone was undeniable. This wasn't just work. I closed the laptop and sat back, my mind racing. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I didn't have concrete proof. And part of me, the part that still loved her, didn't want to believe it. When she came home that evening, she was all smiles, acting like everything was perfectly normal. I tried to match her energy, but inside, I was falling apart. "Hey, how was the meeting?" I asked, my voice a little too casual. "Oh, it went great," she said, setting her camera bag down. "We're planning a big shoot next week." I nodded, pretending to listen, while my mind replayed the emails over and over. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Something was going on and I needed to figure out what. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of dread. Hannah was already up, sipping coffee at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone like everything was normal. But for me, nothing felt normal anymore. I couldn't stop thinking about the emails I had read the day before. Who was Caleb? A coworker? A friend? Or something more? My mind kept spinning through possibilities, but no matter how I tried to rationalize it, the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. I decided to test the waters, to see if I could get any clues without outright confronting her. "So, what's on your plate today?" I asked, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Just some editing," she replied casually, not looking up from her phone. "And I might meet up with a couple of clients later." "Clients like Caleb?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light, as if the name had just come up in passing. Her reaction was subtle but telling. She paused for a fraction of a second before looking up at me, her expression carefully neutral. "Yeah, Caleb's one of the people on the magazine project." "Why?" I shrugged, playing it off. "Just curious. You've mentioned him a couple of times." She nodded and went back to her phone, but I could see the gears turning in her head. It was a small victory, but it confirmed one thing. Caleb wasn't just another name in her Rolodex. Later that day, I made a decision. I needed answers, and if Hannah wasn't going to give them to me, I'd find them myself. I started small, looking at her social media. Most of her posts were related to work, pictures from shoots, behind-the-scenes clips, the usual. But as I scrolled further back, I noticed a pattern. Caleb had liked nearly every photo she'd posted in the past few months, often leaving comments that felt familiar. Things like, "Absolutely stunning," or "That light really brings out your magic." It wasn't concrete proof, but it was enough to make my stomach churn. Over the next few weeks, I became hyper-aware of everything Hannah did. Every time she left the apartment, every time she checked her phone, every time she mentioned work, I couldn't help but wonder, was she lying? Was she meeting Caleb? Was I just being paranoid? The breaking point came on a Friday night. She told me she had a team dinner and wouldn't be back until late. Normally, I would have accepted it at face value, but this time I couldn't. I needed to know. I waited until she left, then grabbed my phone and called my best friend, Mark. "Hey man," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need a favor." Mark didn't hesitate. "What's up?" "I need you to help me figure out what Hannah's really up to." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ethan, are you sure you want to go down this road?" "I don't have a choice," I said quietly. "I need to know the truth." Mark agreed to help and we came up with a plan. I texted Hannah, asking her where she was, and Mark would check out the restaurant she claimed to be at. If she was there, great. Maybe I really was overthinking things. But if she wasn't, when I texted her, she replied almost immediately, At Olive and Vine with the team. Be home late. I forwarded the message to Mark, and he headed out. An hour later, he called me back. Ethan, she's not here. My heart sank. Are you sure? Positive, he said. I even asked the hostess. There's no team dinner here tonight. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. For the first time, I couldn't deny it anymore. Hannah was lying to me. I spent the rest of the night pacing the apartment, trying to decide what to do. Confront her? Wait and see if she'd confess? Part of me wanted to scream at her, demand answers, make her tell me the truth. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, just wanted this all to go away. When she came home around midnight, she seemed surprised to see me still awake. Hey, she said, kicking off her shoes. Why are you up? Couldn't sleep? I replied, my voice carefully neutral. She nodded, looking tired but happy, as if she'd just had the time of her life. And maybe she had, just not with me. That night, as I lay awake again, I made up my mind. I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to know the full truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. I know it sounds extreme, but at that point, I felt like I had no other options. I needed someone who could get answers without Hannah knowing. Someone who could confirm once and for all what was really going on. It only took a week for the investigator to come back with a report. And when I opened it, my worst fears were confirmed. Hannah and Caleb weren't just co-workers. They'd been seeing each other for months, meeting up at hotels and cafes, sometimes even while I was at work. The report included photos, timestamps, even receipts. It was all there in black and white. I felt a wave of emotions. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak, but mostly, I felt numb. That evening, I waited for Hannah to come home. When she walked through the door, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the report in front of me. We need to talk, I said, my voice cold and steady. She froze, her eyes darting to the folder on the table. What's that? It's everything, I said. Everything I didn't want to believe. Everything you've been lying about. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she sighed, dropping her bag on the floor. Ethan, I can explain. Can you? I asked, my voice rising. Because I'd love to hear how you explain sneaking around with Caleb while I've been here. Trusting you. Supporting you. Loving you. She flinched, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said quietly. But it did, I said. And you let it happen. You lied to me, over and over again. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to stop. I didn't want to hurt you. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You did. The conversation lasted for hours, but in the end, there was nothing left to say. Hannah admitted everything, how it started, why she kept it going, how she thought she could have it both ways. By the time she left that night, taking a suitcase and promising to come back for the rest of her things, I felt like a part of me had been ripped away. For days, I walked around in a daze, trying to process everything. But slowly, I began to realize something. As painful as it was, this was also a chance to start over. To rebuild my life without the lies, the doubt, the betrayal. And that's exactly what I did. If you're still watching, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Sharing stories like this can help someone else who might be going through something similar. The days after Hannah left were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. The apartment felt unbearably quiet without her. The kind of silence that presses on your chest and refuses to let you breathe. Her toothbrush was still in the bathroom. Her favorite mug sat on the counter, and every little thing she'd left behind was a reminder of what I'd lost. Or maybe, what I'd never really had. But life doesn't stop just because you're heartbroken. I went back to work, forcing myself to focus on coding and meetings, anything to distract from the knot in my stomach. Mark checked in on me daily, trying to get me out of the house, but I wasn't ready. I needed time to process everything. It wasn't long before Hannah started reaching out. At first, it was small things. A text asking if she could pick up her stuff, a call to explain. I ignored her at first, But after a week, I caved. We met at a coffee shop, neutral territory where we could talk without the weight of our shared space hanging over us. She looked tired, like she hadn't been sleeping any better than I had. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. I nodded, waiting for her to speak. "I'm not here to make excuses," she began. I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," I said, my voice steady but cold. "Over and over again." "I know," she admitted, her eyes filling with tears. "I messed up, Ethan. I let things get out of control, and I didn't stop it when I should have." There was a time when seeing her cry would have broken me, but now, it just felt hollow. I wanted to believe her, to think she was truly sorry, but the trust between us was shattered. "Why Caleb?" I asked, finally voicing the question that had been eating away at me. She hesitated, looking down at her coffee cup. "It wasn't about him," she said eventually. "It was about me. I felt lost, like I wasn't enough, like I needed something more. And he was there, paying attention to me, making me feel wanted." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. "So I wasn't enough?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. "No, Ethan, it's not like that," she insisted. "You're amazing. You always have been. This wasn't your fault. It was mine." I leaned back, letting her words sink in. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to take her back and try to rebuild what we'd lost. But another part of me, the part that had stayed up nights wondering where she was, the part that had read that investigator's report with tears in my eyes, knew that wasn't possible. "Is it still going on?" I asked, needing to know. She shook her head. "No, I ended it. I haven't seen or spoken to Caleb since I moved out." I nodded, though it didn't bring much comfort. "I need time," I said finally, "to figure out what I want, what's next. Right now, I can't give you any answers." "I understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We left it at that. She came by a few days later to pick up the rest of her things, and just like that, 2 years of love, laughter, and what I thought was forever were packed into a few boxes and gone. For a while, I thought that was the end of it. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. 2 months later, I was finally starting to feel like myself again. I joined a gym, started going out with friends more often, and even dipped my toes into the world of online dating. Nothing serious, just a few casual dinners to remind myself that there were other people out there. Then, one evening, I got a call from Mark. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his tone urgent. "What's up?" "Hannah's back with Caleb." I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. "How do you know?" "I ran into them at a bar downtown," he said. "They were all over each other, Ethan. Like, zero shame." My stomach churned. Even though I told myself I was over her, hearing this still hurt. "Are you sure?" I asked, needing to confirm the worst. "Positive," Mark said. "I'm sorry, man. I thought you should know." I hung up, feeling a mix of anger and sadness that I couldn't quite untangle. It wasn't that I wanted her back. I didn't. But knowing she'd gone back to the very person who had helped destroy our relationship felt like a slap in the face. I spent the next few days trying to move past it, but the news gnawed at me. It wasn't just about Hannah anymore. It was about me. I needed to let go of the anger, the resentment, the what-ifs. So I made a choice. I wouldn't let her or Caleb have any more power over me. A week later, something unexpected happened. I was at a networking event for work, chatting with some colleagues when I met Sophie. She was an entrepreneur, running her own small marketing agency, and there was something about her that instantly put me at ease. We talked for hours that night, laughing about our shared love of bad 90s sitcoms and commiserating over the challenges of running a business. By the end of the evening, I found myself asking for her number. Sophie was different from anyone I'd ever met. Kind, ambitious, and refreshingly honest. She didn't play games or hide behind excuses. From the very beginning, she made it clear who she was and what she wanted. As we started spending more time together, I realized something important. I'd spent so long chasing after Hannah's approval, trying to make her happy, that I'd forgotten to think about my own happiness. With Sophie, things felt easy. She didn't make me question myself or my worth. She didn't make me feel like I had to compete for her attention. For the first time in years, I felt like I could just be myself. Of course, life wasn't done testing me yet. One evening, as Sophie and I were walking out of a restaurant, we ran into Hannah. She looked surprised to see me, and even more surprised to see Sophie. "Ethan," she said, her voice a mix of shock and something else I couldn't quite place. Hey, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Sophie smiled politely but didn't say anything, sensing the tension. "How have you been?" Hannah asked, clearly struggling to make conversation. "I'm good," I said. "And you?" She hesitated. "I've been okay. It's been a lot, you know?" I nodded, not really sure what else to say. "Well, it was nice seeing you," I said finally, steering Sophie toward the parking lot. "Wait," Hannah said, stepping forward. "Can we talk? Just for a minute." I glanced at Sophie, who nodded. "Go ahead," she said softly. "I'll wait in the car." As she walked away, Hannah turned to me, her expression unreadable. "Is she your girlfriend?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply. Hannah nodded, looking down at her feet. "I'm happy for you," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "What did you want to talk about?" I asked, cutting to the chase. I wanted to say I'm sorry," she said, "for everything. For hurting you, for lying, for leaving things the way I did." "Okay," I said, not sure where this was going. "And I miss you," she added, her voice barely above a whisper. I froze, caught off guard by her words. "Hannah," I began, searching for the right thing to say. "I know I don't deserve another chance," she said quickly. "But I had to tell you. I needed you to know how much I regret what I did." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Hannah, I appreciate you saying that, but it's too late. I've moved on and I'm happy now. You need to move on too." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I understand," she said. I wish things had been different." "So do I said. "But we can't change the past." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Hannah standing there as Sophie waited for me by the car. That moment felt like closure, not just with Hannah, but with everything that had happened. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. If you've ever gone through something like this, you know how hard it is to rebuild yourself after betrayal. But trust me, it's possible. Life moves on, and so can you. Don't forget to share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. Sharing these experiences can help someone else. Sophie and I drove home in comfortable silence after the encounter with Hannah. Her presence had stirred emotions I thought I'd buried: anger, sadness, a strange mix of nostalgia and relief. But most importantly, it reinforced what I already knew. I had made the right choice to move on. Sophie glanced at me as we pulled into the driveway. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, managing a small smile. "Just surprised, I guess." "You handled that really well," she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "It's not easy running into someone like that." "It's not," I admitted, "but it helps to have someone like you by my side." Her smile widened, and for the first time since the encounter, I felt a sense of calm. But as it turned out, Hannah wasn't ready to fade quietly into the past. A few days later, I received an email from her. The subject line read, "One last thing." Against my better judgment, I opened it. "Ethan, I know I said I wouldn't bother you again, but there's something you need to know. Caleb wasn't just a mistake. He was a wake-up call. I didn't realize how much I was sabotaging myself until it was too late. I've started therapy, trying to understand why I hurt the people I care about most. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you can find it in your heart to wish me well. You meant so much to me, and I'll always regret what I lost. Hannah." I stared at the screen, unsure how to feel. Part of me wanted to delete the email and forget it ever existed. But another part, perhaps the part that still cared about her as a person, wanted to believe she was sincere. I decided not to respond. That chapter of my life was over, and no email could change that. Meanwhile, things with Sophie were going better than I could have hoped. She wasn't just my partner. She was my best friend, my sounding board, my biggest cheerleader. We spent our weekends exploring new hiking trails, trying out hole-in-the-wall restaurants, and binging terrible reality shows. But as our relationship deepened, so did my fear of repeating the past. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, she turned to me, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," I said automatically, but the look in her eyes told me she wasn't buying it. "Ethan, talk to me," she said gently. "I can tell something's bothering you." I hesitated, unsure how to put my feelings into words. "It's not you," I said finally. "It's me. I'm scared." "Scared of what?" "Of messing this up," I admitted. "Of trusting too much or not enough. Of making the same mistakes I made with Hannah." Her expression softened, and she took my hand in hers. "Ethan, you're not the same person you were then. And I'm not Hannah. Whatever we face, we'll face it together. But you have to let me in." Her words hit me like a bolt of lightning. She was right. If I wanted this relationship to work, I couldn't let my past define my future. As Sophie and I grew stronger, I began to feel a sense of closure about everything that had happened with Hannah. But life, as it often does, had one more twist in store. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I spotted Caleb in the parking lot. He was leaning against a sleek black car, scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. My first instinct was to walk away to avoid a confrontation, but something in me snapped. "Caleb," I called, my voice steady. He looked up, startled, before breaking into a smug grin. "Ethan, long time no see." I walked up to him, keeping my tone calm but firm. "What are you doing here?" "Relax, man," he said, holding up his hands in mock innocence. "I'm just meeting someone for a coffee." "Look," I said, cutting him off. "I don't care what you're doing or who you're meeting, but you and I both know what you did was wrong. You didn't just ruin a relationship. You betrayed someone who trusted you." He smirked, clearly unbothered. "And? You've moved on, haven't you? Got yourself a new girl. So why are you still hung up on the past?" His words stung, but I refused to let him get under my skin. "I'm not hung up on the past," I said evenly. "But I believe in accountability. Maybe one day you'll understand that." He laughed, shaking his head. "Whatever helps you sleep at night, man." As I walked away, I felt a surprising sense of relief. Confronting Caleb wasn't about him. It was about me. It was about finally letting go of the anger and taking back control of my own story. That evening, I told Sophie about the encounter. "Wow," she said, shaking her head. "I don't know if I would have been that calm." "I wasn't calm," I admitted, "but I was in control. And that's all that matters." She smiled, leaning her head on my shoulder. "You're stronger than you think, Ethan." Her words stayed with me, a reminder that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning and growing. A few weeks passed after my encounter with Caleb, and I genuinely started to feel like I was putting everything behind me. Sophie and I were growing closer every day, and for the first time in a long while, my life felt stable. But life has a way of testing you just when you think you've found your footing. Started with a phone call. I was in the middle of a project meeting when my phone buzzed. I glanced down and my heart sank. It was Hannah. I let it go to voicemail, but as soon as the meeting ended, curiosity got the better of me. Her message was short but urgent. "Ethan, I need to talk to you. It's important. Please call me back." I debated ignoring it, but something in her voice sounded off. Against my better judgment, I called her back. "Ethan," she said as soon as she picked up. "Thank you for calling." "What's going on, Hannah?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "It's Caleb," she said, her voice shaking. "He's been harassing me." I didn't know who else to call. I leaned back in my chair, unsure how to respond. "Hannah, I'm sorry you're going through that, but why are you telling me this?" "Because I thought you'd understand," she said, her voice breaking. "You know what he's like. You know how manipulative he can be. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. What do you want me to do, Hannah? Just talk to him, she said. Tell him to leave me alone. He might listen to you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything she'd put me through, she wanted me to clean up her mess? Hannah, I don't think that's a good idea, I said firmly. Please, Ethan, she begged. I don't know who else to turn to. I hesitated, torn between wanting to help and not wanting to get dragged back into her drama. In the end, my better nature won out. Fine, I said. I'll talk to him, but this is the last time, Hannah. After this, I'm done. Later that evening, I met Caleb at a small bar downtown. He looked surprised to see me but quickly masked it with his usual smug grin. Ethan, he said, leaning back in his chair. To what do I owe the pleasure? I sat down across from him, keeping my expression neutral. We need to talk about Hannah. His grin widened. What about her? She says you've been harassing her, I said bluntly. It needs to stop. Caleb's expression darkened, and for the first time, I saw a flash of anger in his eyes. Harassing her? He scoffed. That's Rich. She's the one who keeps reaching out to me, not the other way around. I frowned, taken aback. What are you talking about? He pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. I hesitated before picking it up, scrolling through a series of messages from Hannah. The texts were flirty, even suggestive, completely at odds with what she told me. She's playing you, man, Caleb said, his tone mocking. Just like she played me. I felt a surge of anger. Not at Caleb, but at Hannah. Had she really dragged me into this mess under false pretenses? I stood up, tossing the phone back to him. Stay away from her, I said coldly. He smirked. Whatever you say, hero. When I got home that night, Sophie could tell something was wrong. Rough day? She asked, handing me a glass of wine. You could say that, I muttered, sinking into the couch. Want to talk about it? I hesitated. Sophie had always been supportive, but part of me didn't want to burden her with my past. Still, I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. It's Hannah, I said finally. She called me, asking for help with Caleb. Sophie raised an eyebrow. And you said yes? Yeah, I admitted. But it turns out she wasn't being entirely honest. Caleb showed me messages she sent him. Messages that make it clear she's been leading him on. Sophie sighed, sitting down beside me. Ethan, why are you still letting her pull you into her drama? I don't know, I said, running a hand through my hair. Maybe I felt guilty. Maybe I thought I owed her something. You don't, Sophie said firmly. You've already done more for her than most people would. It's time to let go. Her words hit me hard. But she was right. Hannah wasn't my responsibility anymore. Thanks, I said, pulling her into a hug. Anytime, she said with a smile. The next day I called Hannah. We need to talk, I said as soon as she answered. What's wrong? She asked, sounding genuinely confused. Don't play dumb, Hannah, I said, my tone sharper than I intended. I saw the messages you sent Caleb. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I can explain, she said finally. Don't bother, I said. I'm done, Hannah. Whatever's going on between you and Caleb, it's not my problem. Don't call me again. I hung up before she could respond, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt free. That evening, Sophie and I went out to celebrate a milestone at her company. As we clinked glasses and laughed with her coworkers, I realized how far I'd come. Hannah was my past, but Sophie was my future. And for the first time, I was ready to embrace it fully. Just when I thought I had finally left the chaos behind, the past decided to knock on my door. Literally. It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind where everything feels peaceful and still. Sophie was in the kitchen, humming along to a playlist while making coffee. I was lounging on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I got up, confused. When I opened the door, my heart sank. Hannah stood there, looking disheveled and panicked. Ethan, she said, her voice trembling. I need your help. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. Hannah, we've been over this. I can't help you. You don't understand, she said, her eyes wide with desperation. It's Caleb. He's been showing up at my place, threatening me. I think he's following me. I stared at her, torn between disbelief and concern. This wasn't the first time she'd cried wolf, but something about the way she was shaking made me pause. Hannah, I said carefully, you need to go to the police. I tried, she said, tears streaming down her face. They said there wasn't enough evidence to do anything. I'm scared, Ethan. I rubbed the back of my neck, glancing back at the door where Sophie was just out of sight. This wasn't my responsibility, but I couldn't ignore someone who was clearly in trouble. Okay, I said reluctantly. Let me make a few calls. Later that afternoon, Mark and I sat with Hannah in her small apartment, trying to piece together what was going on. So, he's been showing up unannounced? Mark asked, leaning forward. Hannah nodded. At first, it was just texts and calls. But now, he's been waiting outside my building, following me when I leave. Have you saved the messages? I asked. Yes, she said, pulling out her phone. Mark and I exchanged a look as we scrolled through the texts. They were unhinged, to say the least. Caleb had gone from begging her to take him back to threatening her when she didn't respond. This is serious, Hannah, Mark said. You're going to need more than a police report. You need a restraining order. I know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I can't do this alone. I sighed, my frustration bubbling under the surface. We'll help you, I said. But this is the last time, Hannah. After this, you're on your own. She nodded, looking relieved. Thank you, Ethan. I don't know what I'd do without you. Over the next few days, Mark and I helped her gather evidence and file for a restraining order. It was exhausting and stressful, but by the end of the week, the paperwork was submitted, and the legal process was underway. Meanwhile, Caleb's behavior escalated. He started showing up at Hannah's workplace, causing scenes that left her shaken and afraid. One night, as Sophie and I were sitting down to dinner, my phone buzzed. It was Hannah. He's here, she said, her voice barely audible. Outside my building. Call the police, I said immediately. I already did, but they said it could take a while for someone to get here. Please, Ethan. I don't know what to do. I glanced at Sophie, who was watching me with a concerned expression. Do you want me to come with you? She asked. No, I said quickly. Stay here. I'll handle it. She nodded, though I could see the worry in her eyes. When I arrived at Hannah's building, Caleb was standing by the entrance, pacing like a caged animal. He looked up when he saw me, his expression twisting into a sneer. Ethan, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Here to play hero again? Leave her alone, Caleb, I said, keeping my voice steady. Or what? He shot back, taking a step toward me. I stood my ground, my heart pounding. Or the police will deal with you. His smirk faltered, and for a moment, I thought he might actually back down. But then he lunged at me. The next few seconds were a blur. He shoved me against the wall, his fists flying, and I fought back, adrenaline coursing through my veins. We grappled, trading blows, until a voice shouted from behind us. Freeze! Hands in the air! 2 police officers had arrived, their weapons drawn. Caleb froze, his chest heaving, and slowly raised his hands. At the station, Hannah and I gave our statements while Caleb was taken into custody. It turned out there was already a warrant out for his arrest in connection to a separate incident, so his fate was sealed. As we left the station, Hannah turned to me, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Ethan, she said. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't need to, I said, my tone firm. But this is it, Hannah. No more calls, no more favors. You need to stand on your own from here on out. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I understand, and I'm sorry for everything. I nodded, turning to leave. For the first time, I felt a sense of finality. This chapter of my life was truly over. When I got home that night, Sophie was waiting for me on the couch. She stood up as soon as I walked in, her eyes scanning me for injuries. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I'm fine," I said, pulling her into a hug. "It's over." She sighed in relief, resting her head on my chest. "Good," because I was starting to think I'd have to fight Caleb myself. I laughed, the tension finally breaking. "I wouldn't put it past you." We sat down together, the weight of the evening slowly lifting. "I'm proud of you," she said, "for helping her, even after everything." "Thanks," I said, "but I couldn't have done it without you." Sophie smiled, squeezing my hand. "Let's leave the past in the past, okay? It's time to focus on us." I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. Life after the chaos with Caleb and Hannah felt lighter. It was as if I'd been carrying this invisible weight for years, and now, for the first time, I could breathe freely. Hannah kept her promise. I didn't hear from her again, and honestly, I didn't want to. Our chapter had closed, and while part of me would always wish her well, I was done letting her drama dictate my life. With Caleb out of the picture and Hannah finally taking control of her own story, I turned my focus completely to Sophie and to myself. Sophie and I grew closer in the weeks that followed. She was my anchor through everything, always there with a kind word or a much-needed reality check. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You've changed," she said, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Changed how?" I asked, curious. "You're more present," she said, "more confident, like you finally believe you deserve to be happy." Her words caught me off guard, but she was right. For so long, I'd been stuck in a cycle of doubt and guilt, second-guessing every decision and clinging to relationships that weren't healthy. But now I felt like I'd finally broken free. "I think I do," I said, smiling back at her. "And a lot of that is because of you." She leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. "I'm just glad I get to be part of your story." Work was another area where I noticed a shift. Without the constant distraction of my personal life imploding, I was able to throw myself fully into my projects. My team and I had been working on a major software launch for months, and when it finally went live, the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. One of my coworkers joked that it was the happiest he'd seen me in years, and honestly, he wasn't wrong. It wasn't just work or Sophie, it was everything. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living, not just surviving. Hannah's restraining order against Caleb was approved, and I heard through the grapevine that she was making changes in her life. She'd started therapy, quit her job, and moved to a new city. It was strange to think about how intertwined our lives had been and how much pain we'd caused each other. But as I reflected on everything, I realized something important. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about letting yourself move on. And that's what I did. A few months later, Sophie and I decided to take a trip together. A week-long getaway to the mountains. It was the first time I'd allowed myself to fully disconnect from work and just enjoy the moment. We spent our days hiking through trails lined with golden leaves, sitting by the fire in a cozy cabin, and talking about everything and nothing. One night, as we sat under a blanket of stars, Sophie turned to me with a serious expression. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course," I replied. "Do you think you'd ever want to get married again?" The question caught me off guard, but not in a bad way. "I think so," I said after a moment, "but only if it's with the right person." She smiled, her eyes twinkling in the starlight. "Good answer." I reached for her hand, lacing my fingers with hers. "What about you?" She nodded. "Yeah, I think I'd like that." That conversation stayed with me long after our trip ended. It wasn't just about marriage. It was about the future we were building together. For the first time in years, I felt excited about what was ahead. Sophie wasn't just my partner. She was my best friend, my confidant, and my biggest supporter. She showed me what it meant to love and be loved in a way that felt safe and real. And that's when I knew. A year after our trip to the mountains, I proposed. It wasn't anything flashy, just the two of us at the park where we had our first date. But when she said yes, I knew I'd found the person I was meant to be with. Our wedding was a small, intimate affair with close friends and family. Mark was my best man, of course, and Sophie's sister stood by her side as maid of honor. Even Hannah sent a card wishing us well. It was a day filled with laughter, love, and a sense of peace I'd never thought I'd find again. Looking back on everything that had happened, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the moments of doubt and fear, I realized something important. Life doesn't always go the way you plan, but that doesn't mean it can't lead you somewhere incredible. I'd loved and lost, made mistakes, and learned hard lessons. But through it all, I'd grown. And in the end, I found something even better than what I'd been searching for. I found myself. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching and for being part of this journey. Life is messy, unpredictable, and sometimes downright painful, but it's also full of second chances and unexpected joys. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this one. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to share what's next. Until then, take care. And remember, it's never too late to start over.